Hello, everyone. World famous. Why did my phone have to go off right when I said that? I don't know if you guys can actually hear that or not, but it did. It like made the notification sound right when this started. Thanks, phone. I guess that one's on me. I should have muted it. But you know what isn't on me? This stream being 5 minutes late. That is the fault of half of my panel here today because half of them were late. That's not my fault. That is 50% of my panelists' fault. But yeah, that's just where we are today. Today, what's the topic? Is secularism cringe? Yes, it is. Goodbye, everyone. So secularism is cringe. I don't even think we need a vote on this one. I'm assuming this will be a unanimous, but we're going to get, but that's going to be what we're going to talk about today. What's the problems with secularism? That type of stuff. And I have my crack team of basedologists here today to dissect this issue. And just, I always mean to say this at the beginning, though I usually forget. But everyone here has a channel, all 6 of us. So go into the description and subscribe to all of our channels. Does anyone have anything they'd like to start us off with?
Yeah, just a bit of a video review. It's real pertinent to the topic at hand. It was a debate. I'm not sure how long ago it took place, but it was between the ex-Muslim apostate prophet and an Islamic fundamentalist, Daniel Haqiqatjou. I'm not going to say who won, but suffice it to say, if you go to that video, I'm surprised it's not deleted because there was the slaughtering of an innocent man by a jihadist. It was brutal and one-sided. Daniel won, and it's not hard to see why. Secularism has no intellectual answer. And I think a lot of the points he brings up are points that we actually should be touching on ourselves. So I'll start off there.
I also
first, sorry to interrupt you, Buckley, but I mean, is there anything specific from that video? I haven't seen it, but is there anything specific that you'd like to get into?
Yeah, actually, there is one thing specific, and it's one thing that's pointed out by Haqiqatjou, which I thought was spot on. He pointed out the fact that one of the main reasons why secularism is actually very invasive is because it relies upon this notion of surveillance. It goes back to Hobbes's notion of the Leviathan state, when you basically have a state envisioned by a group of people agreeing and throwing down their arms and sharing a power balance because there's some sort of net benefit to get in collaboration. It builds some kind of suspicion within society where everyone is just watching everyone. And that kind of leads into a sort of surveillance state where technology is pretty much used as a way of keeping tabs on people and making sure that they are in line. So a big reason why a lot of us just don't use our faces or will use pseudonyms rather than our actual names is because using this sort of technology, if someone doesn't like our opinion, they could easily take it to an employer and they could use it to take away our very livelihoods, make sure we don't get a livelihood, make sure we're less likely to be employed. They don't mind that affecting families. And it's mostly kind of an outgrowth of that surveillance state. And also Western democracies and secular democracies usually use this as a way of creating uniform consensus opinion. When Brunei wanted to invoke, I believe it was something like the death penalty for homosexual acts, whether you agree with that or not, the international community responded to it by putting down sanctions. Now, you would think, okay, those are sanctions, but that involves making sure trade doesn't go to a country. It literally starves people into conformity. It's not something even felt by the elites of that country. It's something felt by the person paying for food out of pocket. And that's just one way in which the sort of hegemony is created. This sort of uniform consensus opinion is created throughout the globe and created where we have our hands on technology, which counts as a form of surveillance over us. It's one issue with secularism and its terrible marriage with the technocratic state. It just becomes so ironically anti-liberal. They promise us freedom, but It's based on everyone just watching everyone and using the apparatus of the state and the fact that we're not submitting our opinion with the intellectual consensus, that they can invoke some sort of punishment. And that was a topic that Hakikichu really did a good job of pressing on Apostate Prophet. And I thought, yeah, that's actually something that liberals are very want to admit, that they have to push liberalism using very illiberal means. So that's maybe the first thing I'd want to bring up if anyone wants to comment on that.
Yes, I'd like. Okay, go.
No, you go. No, you go ahead. You've probably got more to say than I do, so you go ahead.
All right. Well, I wanted to say something because that actually, what John Fisher said, actually ties into something I noticed in my video on secularism on my channel. And in that video, one of the points I brought up was that secularism is actually a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, atheism goes back to ancient times, but secularism as an idea is very modern, and it was invented specifically to empower the state in a kind of Juvenalian conflict. So when you had the wars of religion back in the sort of the 15th and 16th centuries, what you had come out of that was a kind of attitude by the intellectual classes of that era that religious conflict needed to be curbed through the power of a strong central state that would act as sort of an umpire between different religious groups. And a lot of anti-clerical monarchists and supported this kind of move toward secularism as a way to politically defang the church and reduce it into a mere private institution. And so it was sort of like, so you would have things like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke getting promoted by oligarchs to sort of disenfranchise Christian and ecclesiastical institutions and empower the state, which supported their views. And that's really, and so that really ties in very nicely with John Fisher's view. Secularism, it's not an accident that secularism empowered the state. That was actually the point of it all along. And I guess that's what I was trying to say. Computing the soul, did you have something to add to that?
Not particularly, but what I would say, which is kind of related to this, and you mentioning the apostate prophet has kind of made me remember this, how secularism, and this is what makes it so cringe, I think, is that it pretends to be the smartest thing to have ever been created. Like you can all think of scientists who parade around as if they've solved this, they've solved the theory of everything, right? But really, it's actually less intellectually stable than something crazy like Mormonism. It is actually, like, I think that young Earth creationism in the Ken Ham school actually makes more sense than secularism, purely because it accepts the existence of God, first of all, and second of all, because it accepts the basic principles of history. Secularism likes to pretend it can produce this new age. Like, is there any other group? There's probably other groups, but I can't think of any at the moment. Are there many other groups that actually sincerely think that they can modify human nature in the same way that secular people can? Like, that's the actual cringe.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say communists think they can, but communists are just...
They are secularists.
They are secularists, yeah. I can't... Yeah, you're either going to go through a liberal enlightenmentism, which tries to change human nature, or you're going to go to communism, which doesn't even think there's such a thing as human nature, and humans can be made into whatever, depending on the economic apparatus. But there is another thing I do want to bring up, if you gents don't mind, unless anyone wants to bring up one more thing. All right.
I guess I would just add to that yeah, the whole secularism is the smartest thing. Again, it's because it's been fashionable amongst smart people for a very long time, and since it's fashionable amongst smart people in our society, it's assumed to be smart. Uh,
Oh, how the wise have become fools.
yes, indeed. Um, so Fisher, okay, I think I said my piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So Charles Coulomb said something brilliant, and I think it just bears repeating. I don't co-sign everything the man says, but I thought this one is really spot on. The idea of a separation of church and state is a nice idea, but it's never put into practice. If you take away a notion of an official religion, an official state, you don't get no state. You just get the ideology of the aristocratic class. That's it. The ideology that's popular amongst them is basically the ideology that gets pushed. If you look at corporations, the reason why they push for liberalism and liberal ideology is because morality sometimes gets in the way of a profit. And of course, if people are willing to complain about you and your views and get you fired, so long as it doesn't hurt the company's bottom line, so be it. You're expendable. You're an employee. Now, going with that in mind, if it is the case, and I think there's something to be said about this, that what happens is media breeds conformity of opinion. That conformity of opinion breeds a kind of consensus view that's most amenable to selling you products, selling you goods. What ends up happening is that just becomes the de facto state church, that popular ideology. The only difference is the state church is at the very least centralized. It's top down. You can actually identify the parties and what they're saying. Whereas this is a little more, for lack of a better word, pernicious, because when you don't have a model, when you don't actually see the ideology being formed except by consensus of the aristocratic, you can't really point to who's at fault for this belief. What ends up happening is you tie in this bad belief system to particular individuals and you create your own kind of conspiracy theory. You end up looking silly because conspiracy theories are hard to verify even if true. And you don't really need a conspiracy theory. You just need the wealthy and the powerful breeding a consensus opinion and more or less pushing something akin to that.
Is
And
John
that's really
Fisher
what we have
like
here.
the first? Is he the first lay NRX theologian?
I was going to say, yeah. That. So what we're
NRX.
talking about is a decentralized atheistic theocracy.
Oh,
Yeah, basically we are talking about that. There's a communist who I really like reading, and he actually speaks about hegemony being created in this way. It's
Gramsci.
Gramsci, thank you. Yeah, Gramsci speaks about it, and I think this is really what's going on in the West. I think that the difference between me and Gramsci is I think the antidote is in the church, is in giving a correct institution of religion the power, whereas Gramsci would think no, it's really more about destabilizing this whole state apparatus. That's probably one of the only differences. It's in solution, but I think largely his communist analysis of it is more or less spot on here.
So Carl Schmitt, when he was talking about liberalism, said that secular liberalism basically was an attempt to take all the religious conflicts and wars and disagreements and kind of just put the things that matter on the back burner and just say, if we can make things work, if we can just leave these things alone, if we can eliminate these questions from the public sphere, then we can, get rid of all of these wars of religions, the different things, and we'll be able to have a more functional society. But what he points out is that obviously, this is a farce and that this is a trick of liberalism to basically just obfuscate the fact that these distinctions are still operating in the background. He calls it the friend-enemy distinction. He says, look, that liberalism doesn't actually create this this secular playing field where none of these discussions on right and wrong or good or evil are taking place. What happens is that they're all just they're mystified, and instead they operate in the background where they can be properly handled by elites who have a better grasp of what's going on, while the central questions are treated as if they're not being addressed, even though they're constantly in play, and friend and enemy coalitions are being made behind the scenes.
Yeah, I have to agree with Auron and 21st and John and what all of you are saying, because as I said earlier, secularism was originally meant to solve the problem of religious pluralism, quote unquote, and it was supposed to posit a strong centralized state as the solution to this, because the state would create that neutral space and prevent the different religions from conflicting with each other. But what ends up happening is that a kind of unofficial religion takes place and consensus is created. And in that case, it kind of begs the question, why exactly is religious conflict inevitable again and unresolvable if we can settle religious questions by just promoting this consensus? We can just promote this consensus to the broad population, and they'll have to deal with this, and that'll just solve any religious conflict in society by itself, wouldn't it?
No.
No. I mean, it's. I'm speaking in terms of counterfactuals, mind you. Like what? The understanding behind secularism is that religious conflict is unsolvable in terms of like rational argument. So you just have to exclude it from all rational public argument in order to save the society. But if we can just resolve these quote unquote religious arguments through this kind of consensus making apparatus, then why is it that rather than by just excluding them outright like liberalism claims, then why did we need to exclude them in the first place?
Well, really, because if you go and read, say, the early secular people, or the people who preceded the seculars, and you understand their arguments, and then you understand the religious establishment before, it's because, frankly, the arguments that they put forth, be it even people who are claimed to be geniuses like Immanuel Kant, through to Descartes or any of these people, they just don't stand up. They simply don't. And so, because they can't face them head on, they have to. I suppose that. I mean, maybe they aren't thinking consciously about this. Maybe they do just assume that religious people are stupid. But like, frankly, if we're thinking from the position of maybe, I don't know, the evil one, right? I'm sorry, but Aquinas is going to be plucking the wings off of Enlightenment philosophers like they're little insects, right? So of course they're not interested in discussion, fundamentally, because they just can't stand up. It just doesn't work.
Well,
Well,
I don't think...
okay. Sorry to butt in, but
Okay.
the sort of fundamental maybe this isn't the fundamental error, but sort of the thing that just proves that the entire basis for secularism is just wrong is that secularism was first established with the understanding that the great wars of religion in Europe, stuff like the 30 Years' War, were things that just could not. These are things that were inevitable because of the marriage between state power and church power, and secularism was the only way to undo this. We know today, though, that this entire hypothesis was completely wrong. This is, if you can learn anything from history, this should be one of the most basic lessons that the 20th century have shown us, that you can still have massive conflicts that are not based on religion. None, and I think sort of part of the reason why people don't understand this is when they think of like when people think of like the early 1900s, when they think of like people with the weird top hats and stuff from World War I, they think of that as a really religious time. So they think those must have been religious wars. But anyone that actually has just a basic understanding of both world wars and all the other conflicts from the 20th century will know that almost none of them had anything to do with religion. I guess you could say, some of the proxy wars during the Cold War were religious when you talk about, groups like in the Middle East. But even then, that's on the backdrop of an ideological war between the Soviet Union and the USA. all the major conflicts had nothing to do with religion. This entire the entire original justification for secularism has been completely proven wrong. Now, what people might say is, but now we have a great period of peace. And relatively speaking, the amount of violent death that has occurred in the past, since the fall of the Soviet Union, has been relatively small. But that also has nothing to do with liberalism or secularism. That has to do with American hegemony being completely unchallenged by any other world power.
Something else to keep in mind, those religious conflicts, when they originated after the princes of Europe succumbed and aided the Protestant Reformation. The thing to remember with the Protestants is, when you said you were a Protestant prince, what's the point in paying the tax to the Pope over in Rome when you got your own church? You're by the Bible, you have your own clergy, everyone's established. Well, a diversity of religious opinion is going to lead to a diversity of conflict. That's what happens. That's one of the benefits of having the Roman Catholic Church as a mediator. And in terms of, the Catholic Church being violent, if you look at the 20th century, when the armed conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States was kicking off, it was His Excellency St. John Paul XXIII who intervened. And it was also the Second Vatican Council working off of his hatred, and of course the hatred of Pope Pius XII, of nuclear arms. They attacked it in the Second Vatican Council for a good reason, because it violated the just war ethic. And the skirmishes that happened in the Crusades are nothing compared to the skirmishes that happened with 21st century armaments. Now, of course, they say, well, those wars would have been just as bad if they had the same nuclear weapons. Yeah, but here's the thing, though. They already had a just war doctrine that, if you look at what happens in the 21st century, led to their disarmament, or pushed for their disarmament. And on top of that, if secularism leads to a huge technological capability of making weapons of mass destruction on a global level, then yeah, I'd say that that's a bad outcome. Sometimes being able to do something doesn't mean you should have done the thing. And nuclear weapons was probably one of the best examples of when you should not have done the thing.
I think I'll just reiterate. I wanted to actually go a step further than Settler's Lament and say that the war between the wars of the quote unquote wars of religion between Protestants and Catholics from the 1500s, those weren't. I mean, if you look at the actors, you had Catholics fighting Catholics and Protestants fighting other Protestants in that war, and really it was a war between different institutions. It was certain countries wanting to break away from the political power of Catholicism and sort of have their own, do whatever they want without any kind of interference in their affairs from the church. And you'll notice that all the Protestant countries they were the only, what I was going to say is all of the countries that remained Catholic and Protestantism didn't get a hold, those countries all had laws saying that the king could choose which people became bishops in that country. And that really highlights what this whole debacle was really about, which is a struggle to empower the centralized state, empower the monarchs of the time.
Yeah, and while all of that is definitely true, and I think that it is important to understand the historic background that kind of got us to kind of the idea of secular detente. I think that now, when most people think of secularism, that's probably not what they think of as the motivating factor, right? Like, the majority of people now who would push this idea would do so because they'll say that basically there's some kind of scientific consensus or some kind of sociological consensus, which is the best way to create, domestic policy and this kind of thing. And I think that's really what you're pushing back against now more than anything, is this idea of neutrality, that there's this socially neutral plane, that there's this objective public policy that if you just get enough experts together, then they'll line up all the numbers on the spreadsheet, and then boom, society flourishes. And so while I think all of the historical and the aspects of avoiding religious war and everything are very good to understand, I think that when people are thinking about it today, what they're thinking about is that secularism means that we follow the science and we go with the experts. It's the rule by the managerial class rather than an expression of values through religious doctrine.
Yes, I agree with you, but if you look at why these liberal philosophers, someone like say Hannah Arendt or John Rawls, if you look at why they were secularists, they gave a variation of this very idea that religion inevitably causes conflict and violence because it can't be you can't rationally discuss it in a public forum. And I guess that sort of ties into the idea of an objective public policy, because the idea is that religious faith can't be objectively discussed in public because faith is irrational or something like that. That's a common
It's
conviction.
self-fulfilling. Yeah, you're right. It's self-fulfilling. These people seem to forget that all over the 16th and 17th century, the Protestant and the Catholic theologians were debating constantly. And that Protestants, so far as I remember, were invited to the Council of Trent. So all of this nonsense about, it's irrational, we can't discuss it, it's all unknowable, it's cope.
Yeah, we unfortunately had the debate me bro. We had debate me bros for centuries now, and look where it's gotten us. But Renaissance is right, and then obviously, why are you taking what they say at face value in the first place? If they're secularists, then they just have no morality.
Well, I was assuming that maybe they want to pursue the good on some level.
I'm talking about Buckley and the rest of them, because. Most modern secularists are utilitarians, right? And it's just in the eye of the beholder. Whatever has utility is in the eye of the beholder. If they believe that they can be part of a neutral priestly class and they're utilitarians, which implies that they can be the arbiters of what is useful and not useful, then they want to just become gods of themselves, and that's just the whole problem.
Right. So just a couple of things. One, not all atheists, are consequential. Some actually are deontologists, although they're rare. John Rawls is probably a good example of that. But even putting that to the side, the idea is reason in theology has always been a sort of check and balance. If you read Thomas Aquinas, he is going to debate points brought up by other theologians, and he's not going to agree with all of them. It's even the ones that seem to benefit him. He doesn't want to argue philosophically that the universe had a beginning because he takes that on faith, and he thinks that the arguments that try to show it don't work. And I kind of sympathize with that position, but the point is, he's not just going to side with the position because he agrees with it. And you obviously had Aquinas and the Thomists debating between the Scotists, and you had all these different positions within the church debating with each other. The issue was the humanists, like Erasmus, didn't like it. They thought, with all this debate going on, we're kind of neglecting our duty to one another, and we're just not imploring any practical benefit to other people. And to some degree, I think there was something to that criticism, because at the time the church was embroiled in her own controversies. Look at the issues with indulgences that went on. Fortunately, people within the church reformed, and that was good. No thanks to those who reformed from the outside, but what can you do? And I think one of the things we have to come clean with is the fact that, yeah, the church itself needs to be an institution with her own set of checks and powers. And I think that by imploring more of that, certain scandals can be avoided. And this is why you had people like John Fisher. This is why you had St. Thomas More, who were very much opposed to both the Protestant revolution from without, but also the corruption from within. I think that is something of an internal critique we could actually take for ourselves when assessing why Protestantism and secularism emerged much later on. It's because sometimes there's a lot of issues from within that need to be taken care of. And I think that there is room for self-reflection, self-criticism, without going to the extreme of secularism. Okay, someone else talk, please. Break the silence.
You know, I've got an idea. How about we discuss the roots of the secularism? Because I think that if we understand what thinkers and what movers really got us to where we are right now, that it could really help. Because I was watching the Distributists' recent video about, I think it was right-wing solutions or something, and he basically debunks them all, right? And he goes, you know, maybe you should be focusing on like nicer things, like folk things, religious things. And, you know, this is the conclusion that I came to about 3 years ago. But the thing is that then you come to a point, well, what's worth imitating? And it's essentially those things that are eternal and those things that are present. And I think that this kind of heuristic gives us an idea of what we should be looking for to fix. Because we see the modern philosophers, they're obviously still trying to think about things that are, at least in some sense, eternal. So where did it all go wrong? So I think that the first person I'd want to mention would be Immanuel Kant, because he drove all this Hegelian thought, which fed into all of the political thought, and he also produced, he managed to mix Hume and Descartes together, which brings a whole host of problems. But the one that I want to really focus on right now is one of the things that Kant argued for. This is sounding like it's completely out there, but hear me out, right? One of the things that Kant argued for was that there is no such thing as truth itself as an object. Being isn't a predicate. Truth isn't a predicate, but only belongs in propositions themselves, right? Now, why is this such a dangerous idea? Because it completely destroys participation metaphysics, which is the basis for God, both under the classical Greek philosophers' view, the Christian view, the Muslim view, and the Jewish view. So that's just one thing that he produces that leads to this problem. The other ones largely being inheritances from Hume and Descartes. So the schisming of the mind from the body from Descartes and the denial of causation from Hume. So I just thought maybe this would be an interesting direction to go in for the rest of the conversation, or for a part of it.
To be fair, I kind of sympathize with the Kantian project, because in part it was actually designed to keep metaphysics off of God, because at this point God became very sickly in all the metaphysical systems that were proposed. Like Newton actually said that time was an attribute of God, and as time was an attribute of God. God is literally in time, and it's actually getting a very weird resurgence in analytic philosophy of religion. I'm not happy with it, but that's what it is.
Is this like Mullins and people like that?
Mullins is one. Yeah, Mullins, yes, but to be fair, it's not like Mullins is working him by himself. Richard Swinburne pushed for this as well. So
Plantinga,
So in analytic philosophy, it's not uncommon, and of course Newton also pushed for that sort of idea, as did Samuel Clarke. But like, if you look at some of the metaphysical systems that were designed and God was sort of involved in, it was, I could totally understand why Kant was having none of that. He wanted just to keep God and the angels and stuff in the noumenal, and that's just practical insight religion gives you. That's it. Let's not focus on that right now. And there's something to that I always sympathize with whenever I hear theologians and philosophers who want to just do away with all the Nicene Christian stuff and go in that direction, but I'm not gonna go into that too much. The point is, that's what the Kantian project was about. It was about keeping this weird non-devotional metaphysic off of God, one that wasn't honored by the church. And to some extent, I kind of sympathize with that, although I don't think it's tenable. And that's essentially what happens when philosophy is done apart from the church too. It's not only a degradation of it's not only a degradation of political philosophy, but also philosophical theology as well. You see kind of a degradation of God from being actus purus, simple, transcendent, to, oh, he's in time and he has emotions and stuff. So, yeah, that sort of thing presents.
So are you saying that Robert Sungenis is a crypto-modernist?
Sungenis is...
I knew you were going to mention him!
No, I'll say this much about Sungenis. I don't know what he's... whereas Mullins comes
he
out
argued
and
God's had emotions.
I know, he did, but he also says God is unchangeable. So the unchanging God who changes his mind, the immutable God who unchanges his mind. I don't know how to read that. I don't know how to interpret that. At least Mullins is clear. I kind of respect that about him. He's kind of clear. He's clear about what he rejects. But yeah.
Well, Sungenis does have a whole book on this, so.
Yeah, to be fair, I should probably read that. But even just from the title alone, immutable means does not change, but he changes his mind. I don't know how to read that. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you've also got from Mullins the modal collapse argument, which ultimately.
I just don't know how. I don't know how the modal collapse argument doesn't work against his conception of God either. So, can God change his mind about what he will create before the creation of the universe? No, because the answer I see is no, because God foreknows what he'll do. And if God foreknows what he'll do and he knows he's not changing his mind, then there's no alternative possibility, in which case the creation of the universe is fated. And that's modal collapse. I don't know how else to think of it. Hasker's...
Well, I mean, it's a ridiculous argument as well. Like, even the one he presents is ridiculous, because he goes, God and the act of creation are synonymous. Therefore, the creation is like forced on God, and it that doesn't make any sense, right? Does my act of me throwing the ball mean that I am the ball? No. Like, this maybe a bit of an ad hoc way of summarizing it, but I think that Ed Faze's response by saying, the creation is ultimately just a Cambridge property of God, and therefore it's not bound up with his essence. I think that was a perfectly legitimate response. And I don't really see how Mullins could come back at that.
Right. Well, I don't want to make this about Mullins, because this is mostly about how secularism is cringe, not how Ryan Mullins' perspective on God is cringe. I think it's cringe. I know, but I do kind of have an odd respect for Mullins anyway. But I'm just going to put that to the side. In terms of secularism as sort of degradation, one of the other things that was pointed out by Hakikachu, and I thought this point was pretty nice as well. One of the issues with secularism is it also creates atomization. So liberal technocratic states that are secular are atomized. They kind of take you away from a religious community, which most people should be a part of, obviously. And they kind of make you placated with just being behind a computer all day. And I know with COVID, that's a pretty easy place to be in right now, but it happens even normally. Why make food? Why go out into a restaurant with friends? Uber Eats. Why go out for entertainment to a movie theater? Just watch on your TV, on your computer screen. Okay. I'm going to push back on this.
What does any of that have to do with secularism? Secularism has been around for at least 300 years. And that seems to be an issue with modern technology.
Right. So to push back on your pushback, the secularism, in terms of what modern technology is doing in conjunction with secularism, is it's taking away one more community that you're supposed to be a part of. If it normalizes atomization, and the religious community is supposed to be anti-atomizing, it pushes against that as well. It reinforces, hey, religions are stupid. Don't mind it. Don't even involve yourself in such a religious community. It's just contributing to that atomization, is my point.
Well, not only that, I'd add to that as well that secularism doesn't really have much of a moral theology beyond does it make you feel good?
Yeah, pretty much.
So, like, you would have a motivation, even in a hyper-technical society, to still do things like go out of your house, go visit a movie, go see a movie with friends, go to church or whatever, because these things are necessary for virtue. But secularism doesn't have that, so it kind of bottomed out the society.
I mean, this is all obviously true. I mean, not only is secularism not only is secularism cringe, it's also just a lie because liberalism is a lie in itself. There's no neutral moral framework. There's no objective society or whatever. And so obviously there's no society without some kind of meta ethic or some kind of story that animates it and a tradition that motivates it. So they're just essentially just lying to you so that they can get whatever they want, as you say, whatever makes them feel good, whatever makes the elite feel good. They can just get rid of all these rigid religious frameworks that they can't change at their convenience and replace it with their own ersatz religion so that they can, be disgusting or whatever they do. Who knows what they do.
Something that I noticed from what you've just said there, 21st, and something I saw in the chat, why are we calling them religions, per se? Why are we calling it religion?
Yeah, just call it the truth, and then everything else lies.
No. I mean, like you have secularism, and then you have religion. When really secularism is just one system competing amongst many, right? So why would there be? It seems almost like language has evolved to sort of make secularism its own separate little thing, separate from religion. When really,
yes, this is just objective reality.
They would say that, right? But there are still the same fundamental precepts in secularism that you'll find in any religion, right? It still makes assumptions about the world. It still comments on reality. The difference is that there's a dichotomy in the language such that it's managed to box itself away from the rest of religions, right? Like, to even use that term. So really, I don't think we should even be using the term religion. I think we should rather be using the terms that relate to the specific systems in question to avoid this kind of schism.
So I think one of the things that is important to remember is like modernity kind of kicks off because you start closing one eye like largely to the metaphysical. And because you can do that, you can then focus a lot more of your energy and expertise. You can your education, everything else on particular areas that yield a lot of material benefits. And so you do that for so long and to such great success that you kind of forget that you've closed off a lot of, kind of the thought space that would have been applied to those metaphysical ideas. And so for a lot of this was just shutting down the majority of it and letting it run in the background for a while. And then what you ended up with is things like progressivism, which kind of become your kind of religious super predator in this environment. Okay, well, we're not going to have these discussions on the nature of morality. We're not going to have these discussions on which religion is right or wrong or which sect is right or wrong. And if we're going to push those discussions out of the public square with ideas like separation of church and state, then they can't inform the public morality. Well, then something else, as we know, will, right? Like we're saying here, there's no neutral area. And so because of that, all of the old systems or all of the classical systems got, shoved out, while most people were assuming that basically like morality would just continue forward in perpetuity. Like that stuff was basically locked down and set aside, and we didn't really need to touch it anymore. And that allowed systems like progressivism that used irreligious language to inform morality to grow, and now to the point where obviously it is much more clear, I think, to many people that it has become its own religion. But a lot of people have a hard time making that leap because they kind of assume this hard barrier that never really existed, but that we kind of societally enforced in order to allow a new age to kind of come forward.
I think that I agree with that, but I would say that secularism was always a religion because, as you said, There was this choice 300 odd years ago, or however long ago, to place religion, as the secular people would consider it, as a private matter. The problem is that this itself is a moral assumption, and therefore it's walked in on the presuppositions of religion, because morality is ultimately just the rules by which man obtains the good, right? And they believed that they could obtain the good by making religion a private matter. But as I've said, this is the realm of religion, so therefore it would always be a religion, in some sense. Maybe a hobbled one. I think that one of the good things that Jordan Peterson said is that ideologies are essentially hobbled religions, right? And I think part of this is because they're kind of phantom. They'll do things that religions act like.
Well, one of the things that Oswald Spengler points out is that like every age as it moves to it's like every civilization as or I should say every society as it moves to its like civilizational phase, like it basically like loses its metaphysical animating spirit, and it tends to instead try to enshrine its past moral ideas into like systems and institutions and that kind of thing. And so I think that was a lot of what happened is we thought by closing our minds to one area and just kind of setting in stone the principles, or at least, like shadows of the principles that we had under those systems, that then we could focus on things like, increasing economic prosperity and advancing science and all those things. And the trick again, like worked for a while. So you can say that it's a religion in the case that it addresses those ideologies and puts them aside. And you're right that anything addressing those things properly understood has a religious aspect. But what I'm saying is, I think that it's hard for a lot of people to see that shift. And because of that, that's what allows a lot of what we see today come in and declare itself secular or objective. It makes it hard for people to understand that experts is just a stand-in for clergy. I think you're seeing more and more people understand that as it becomes fervent and more fanatical. But I think it's understandable why that shift took so long for people to start seeing it that way.
I mean, I would have to vociferously disagree with Oswald Spengler on the point that as things became more centralized inside of institutions and systems, that things began to break down. Because as, if I'm remembering Spengler correctly, the Faustian civilization begins roughly with the fall of Rome. And this would have been around about 476 AD in the West. So at this point, the West has largely been dominated to some extent. I mean, there are places where it becomes Arian, but it's dominated by Catholic Christianity centered in Rome, right? And as the civilizational spring that Spengler describes burns out up until, I believe, 1500, all that happens is that the church becomes more and more centralized, and then it enters into the summer and autumn as it becomes decentralized. So I don't think that his historical theory works here that well. I think, if anything, it's the exact opposite. I think that if you have things too decentralized, if you have people too individualized and too isolated, and especially if they're following things that are in moral error, which is, I think, the ultimate cause of this, moral or otherwise metaphysically erroneous, that's when the problem comes about. That's when the breakdown.
I think that's a misunderstanding, or maybe I explained that incorrectly about centralization. What Spengler's talking about there is the transfer from. He says that it's basically when we stop dealing with the suffering of life spiritually and metaphysically, and instead try to deal with it intellectually.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, you're never going to intellect. Okay, yeah. Okay, that's completely reasonable, right?
Yeah. So that's what he's saying is instead of viewing these as spiritual matters, instead we try to take the what were spiritual solutions and secularize them and turn them into rigid systems inside of institutions.
Oh, yeah.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, you're trying to domesticate a mystery.
Right. That's exactly right.
Because human suffering is an indivisible thing. And in fact, I think this actually, like, who here has heard of Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic?
We've watched him a lot.
Yeah. I have.
Yeah. So he was debating with Bishop Robert Barron, and Barron took a clip out of the debate and stuck it in one of his videos on his channel. And Cosmic Skeptic goes, I find the arguments for God very convincing, but there's one problem, and that's of suffering. And when I look through intellectual history, I see that suffering is acknowledged more than causation and things like that. And so therefore it makes sense to begin a philosophical system with suffering. Now, when I heard this, I hope that you guys agree with me here, but I think, like, what are you saying? Like, you don't need philosophy to cope with this. What you need is to chill out, And I think that there's a lot of people who are like that as well. I mean, it needs to be recognized for what it is. It's a moral problem, not an intellectual problem. You don't start with suffering. And I think this is the point that Auron has pointed out that Spengler is making. And I think that's completely true if we consider it in that sense, yes.
And then Alex O'Connor is obsessed with the bad feelings of literally other animals and stuff and everything. So it's kind of a weird, strange God that he's set up in this situation in order to solve his problems.
I mean, I know for a fact that I could never work on him because I'd have just gone to him, well, animals don't possess rationality, so they can't really truly suffer. They can just feel pain. That's not going to work on him.
I mean, to be fair, there are a lot of people who are not... There are a lot of people who don't have access to the rational faculties, but their suffering is still... Yes. Okay. My point is people who are mentally debilitated also suffer as well. And yes, because they are human beings, because they have those... Because it's at the very least there potentially. It's just not a potential that is actualized yet. It's there in essence. Yeah, they're still worthy of some kind of protection. But the point is, it still is very much a visceral thing to see a wild animal hurt or in pain or needlessly tortured. I mean, this is even why we have humane rules about how we kill our animals before we turn them into food. So, I get it on a rational level. It's very hard to see. I do sympathize with somebody who sees the suffering of animals, especially in slaughterhouses, and comes to the conclusion that, yeah, there's just something really wrong here. There's even if he's coming to that conclusion from the wrong premises, which I would argue he is. I really don't blame him in coming to that conclusion. It's really hard to see an animal suffer.
Yeah, but I agree. It's difficult to see an animal suffer. But first of all, I would say that in many cases, that as Aquinas himself says, this is because of the cruelty of the human being manifested in causing this pain. But also it's because we from the garden have been given dominion over all of the creatures of the earth. And so naturally we feel a sense of responsibility. However, that doesn't necessarily reflect from the animal's point of view. Right, so that was the point I'm essentially making, right? Yeah, of course, keep the animal welfare laws. Of course, I'm not suggesting anything or even implying anything like that. What I'm saying is that the perspective needs to be considered correctly when it comes to these sorts of things.
Right, it reveals the darkness within humans whenever they do that kind of cruelty to them. It's not necessarily about the animals in the direct sense, but I would also push back in another way where you were saying, I think, John Fisher, you were trying to be fair when I'm very unfair, obviously. You were trying to be fair to the atheists that aren't consequentialists and are, in fact, deontologists. Well, I don't know. It just seems like they're shifting the problem away. The problem is that they're the decider of the morality. So no matter what, it is arbitrary. And it is kind of naturally utilitarian in some way, because why would you set up a deontological framework that wasn't in some way satisfying to yourself as an atheist?
Well, I mean a few things. One, even there are utilitarians who set up systems that they think are true from the get-go, and when it comes to some stupid conclusions, they'll still follow it. And if it comes to doing moral extremes, which even I would agree with, they'll still do it. So Peter Singer is kind of an example of this as a utilitarian. Yes, he has some very stupid opinions, like maybe it's okay to let animals hump you and stuff. And maybe it's okay to kill a child who is mentally handicapped because that sort of infanticide prevents a child from entering into the world who will be happy. He has some very, I'll even say evil opinions on that, but he'll also write articles about how we should give until it hurts. Like the average person can definitely give so much more of their income than they do, just to help alleviate all the pain in the developing world.
Okay, but John, that just means that they find. Sorry.
Right, just to tie it into the Kantians, my point is there are some people who get their ethical system and stick with it, even if the intuitions don't pan out. So just giving an empirical example. But on the other hand, there are people who say, look, this is my deontological system. I follow it because I think proper reason commits me to it, and I'm going to go from there. And some people do go in that direction. They'll say, look, it's not me deciding this, it's my moral system. And it's no more arbitrary than having like a mathematical system where you set up some initial axioms and you see where the conclusion goes. And at a certain point, yes, everyone is a decider, but I mean, you could say the same thing about religious ethics. So for example, oh, you want to go with God, but why are you choosing the Islamic code as opposed to the Christian code, or the Christian code as opposed to the Jewish code? And then you just go into other reasons, but then it's no longer about the intrinsic goodness of the ethical code. You can just say, yeah, it's because of this other thing. The point is there's always some level of subjectivity.
Well, I would say that they would find utility in the consistency of it, but technically that would also be valid for people that choose one religion over another. Is that it seems more consistent, more airtight, and everything. So, there's just they're compromising their desire for having like things that make intuitive sense for having something that feels fully logically consistent, which is a nice, like, unique autist desire that like 90% of people don't have. But yeah.
No, I think a lot of people have it. I mean, you see, it's ultimately the difference between whether you want a logically consistent one or you want one that's grounded in reality. Because the fact of the matter is that human beings can only acknowledge so many indivisible realities, or we'll call them mysteries. You know, there are certain mysteries that human beings can acknowledge, but reality has all of these mysteries in play at once. And while we can make nice little, castles in the sky with idealistic, logically consistent systems, the reality is that you need to, in some sense, acknowledge all of the mysteries all at once, just to fully incorporate reality.
Interesting.
Because you see it, you see it with certain people, right? They'll overemphasize massively some sort of philosophical idea and whack away again and again and again and again. And I think that G.K. Chesterton pointed this out pretty well in Orthodoxy, But then there's always this silver bullet that completely blows away the system, and that's precisely because human beings, by our own nature, and even like any natural philosophical school, we are unable to incorporate all of the mysteries all at once. So you can't really make that kind of system.
Oh, so, kind of secularism is an attempt at that, and the problem with secularism is not necessarily the use of reason, but the hubris of humanity?
Well, I mean, it's the problem inherent in all natural religion, I would say.
Right, but pride is a barrier to faith, isn't it?
Well, yes, of course. Yeah, but I'm saying, like, you could have the most humble man on the planet, but without revelation, you're going to make errors.
Of course, but he's not predisposed to reject revelation if it was given.
No, but I'm assuming, like, the absence of revelation when I'm saying this here. But, like, you can be the most humble man to ever live, obviously, like, without divine essence, in hypostatic union, and you will still not be able to acknowledge everything that's going on all at once. That's just beyond human capability.
Yeah, no, we don't disagree here.
Yeah, I'm just like, eking out and explaining my point further and further.
Happy Trinity Sunday. Yes, Tone. Yes. It was a good math. I was going to say something else. Does anybody want to jut in a good point first? I was just going to say... Oh, gosh. Okay, well, I was just going to continue with... another thing about this is that even though it's like, all the basedologists reject secularism and everything, we still, 90% of the time when we're using, when we're talking about these issues that are happening in the world, we're kind of relegated to use the stupid poli-sci mainstream language that people often use to describe things. Oh, it's like, oh, the welfare state, blah, 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 all this crap and everything. But if we just actively decide to use just explicitly religious language in terms of this stuff that supposedly is in the secular issues, it becomes, a bit more clear and true and obvious. And one example of that is that, okay, we've got the opponents, the progressives, and the LGBT, all that stuff, right? And, if we argue about it in terms of reason, well, obviously, I mean, I've heard from a few people that have, lived in those communities frequently or been around that upper class of people. And when they appear to be, on the same page and ally, it's crazy. Sometimes they'll admit, oh, yes, I know what I'm doing is wrong, or I know this feels wrong and everything, but, I just don't know any other way out, or I just don't want to admit it, basically. And, I'm pretty sure we have a word in Christian theology for something that someone knows is wrong, but they're still attached to it, and it corrupts their reason, and they will retaliate against anybody that points it out. So yeah, I mean, if we just view it in this kind of context, it becomes a bit more clear, and it just all this froth kind of descends away, and it just becomes extremely simple in my eyes. So that's just why I saw there.
I must admit, I wish I could see it simply, because to me, the more I think about it, the more insanely complex the problem becomes.
Yeah,
I mean, you can say it's sin. I mean, there was this snake in the garden once and got our first mother to eat of the fruit. Sure, but you can say this for anything, right?
Sometimes you can view a Rubik's Cube in a simple way. I'm just saying.
Yes, but the thing is that you have to distill that simple view of the Rubik's Cube into the moves to solve it.
Well, obviously, appealing to reason wouldn't really solve something that bad, because it completely corrupts reason. This is why secularism failed so bad, and literally, the information class and the majority of the population are literally insane and incapable of reason. It's because once you abandon any of that basic moral theology,
but you have to think about the problem in such a way that you can, derive discrete steps to moving towards giving a remedy to the problem, even if a very limited one. Because we're on Earth for a reason. We're not on Earth to point out to say, oh, there's sin. We're there to help people out.
Now, my question, Renaissance, is: are we on the Earth in order to continue doing internet debates with Alex O'Connor and tweet out this really base tweet that has all the right points? That's why I'm on it.
Well, I mean, it depends if it's helping people. If you could prove it is, then sure.
So yes, we're on Earth to do based and red pill things. So we got one super chat. Jedi Knight Anathan Cringewalker, $5. Secularism presents itself as neutral because it makes no beliefs. This lie must be crushed with the reality that it has beliefs, wrong beliefs. Yeah, I mean, thanks. Basically stuff we've already said. Really in depth and insightful there, Cringewalker. Thanks.
He gave you money, man.
We know each other. I mean, I'm still mean to my viewers even if I don't know them. But
even if they give you money.
But I don't know. Does anyone have anything to say to Cringewalker's incredibly insightful comments there?
Yes.
Yeah. You could go first then.
I was just going to say yes. That was all I was going to say.
Oh.
I was just going to say yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the belief that you should always bring up to them is whether or not it is virtuous to be neutral in matters of religion. Because as soon as they say it's a virtue, they have to give some sort of justification for that. and you just keep pushing and pushing from there. At a certain point, they're going to say it's either because they have some sort of objective basis for it, one that should be encourageable to everyone to believe, or at a certain point, they're just going to say it's a matter of personal preference, in which case you could easily just say, well, my specific beliefs are my own personal preference, that neutrality is not virtuous. And there you are.
Okay, thanks. So where are we at? What else do people have to say? Where I don't know where we were before I interjected with the super chat. Okay, someone talk.
Okay. So another thing, one other thing to bring up with secularism is how it claims to be neutral, not just in matters of governance, but also in terms of global governance, because it's not just within secular countries that this hegemony is taking place, but without as well. Because on the one hand, they'll say, yeah, of course, we're about leaving everyone alone and letting people do their own thing, but they won't do the same with other countries. That is something that they will push for, and they will use very violent and extreme means. In the Hikikichu versus apostate prophet battle, Hikikichu was actually very smart to point out the Iraq War. And not just the Iraq War in 2003, but also the Gulf War as well. And in both those cases, they considered it justified to bomb enemy nations to make sure that they would follow Western liberal values. And they are also willing to put sanctions on other governments that don't follow in these values. Again, this is very violent. How can someone justify their so-called liberal values while practicing very illiberal means? How is that not a contradiction?
Because liberalism is in itself in a contradiction. It's all lies and they're snakes.
Exactly.
Wait, secular liberalism is an international empire? Always has been.
It always has been. It always has been.
Okay.
Auron, what do you think about this?
He just left. He had another stream he had to leave for. He was a last minute addition. Speaking of which, I haven't complained enough yet today, but it was very difficult getting the lineup today. Do you guys not know who I am? I am the one and only world famous Settlers Lament. I should have people at my beck and call begging to come on these streams. That's a joke, guys.
Crickets.
Greeted with silence. The sound of pure silence.
Seller, I'm always loyal. I'm like, you said I'm like who, right? I was.
You're my Britisher. Except
I'm more based. Nah, I'm kidding. We're equally based. Maybe you're slightly more based, to be honest. But I mean, secularism is a lie. What else can I say?
I remember the British are banning me, blocking me a while ago because I called them out on something. Oh well.
He is the cringest cringe
he's like
ever.
a mega cringe lord.
Yeah.
I remember the last time
the Britisher reference is that he used to be Academic Agent's co-host. So that's what it means when you refer to someone.
I remember when I went on Academic Agent stream with the Britisher, and we had like a massive fight over banning pornography.
Based?
It was to such an extent where like the screenshot was actually, you know what, I won't share that because it would be mocking the Britisher. But yeah, suffice to say I won. I mean, Sargon sided with me somehow on the issue.
Oh, that means you actually won.
Like, Sargon backed me on the fact that I wasn't arguing for the banning of porn. I was arguing that pornography and sexual misconduct led to the fall of the Roman Empire and is leading to the fall of our civilization. Yeah, and Sargon was like, hear me out, basically. And the Britisher was just going completely nuts. And yeah, that was that.
Got any ad homs there? Nah, I'm kidding.
Got quite heated at points. Yeah.
Crickets indeed.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
So I actually just do want to put out the opposite end of the liberal spectrum. So the more non-invasive, negative liberal side is like the libertarian position. But libertarianism also just kind of ends up in its own set of contradiction, because if you don't have a liberal power that exerts itself around the world, then how is it not making itself vulnerable to outsider attack? So it seems like liberalism only really has two modes. Either it's self-destructive, in which case it's not going to last, or it's super invasive, in which case it seems to contradict itself. There doesn't really seem to be any good ground or any good in between.
Again, why? I mean, I think it's sometimes useful to think of it just in the power dynamic realm. You know, liberalism, when it's communicated to people, like let's say, for example, it's communicated from the elites to like the peasants in the hinterland, aka the right wing, wherever, right? And it's like, okay, we all believe in liberalism. And then the peasants are like, what is liberalism, so that we can, decide whether it's good or not. And they'll say liberalism is libertarianism, which is a psyop in order to disarm those peasants and keep them under control. And then for themselves, obviously, liberalism is, when you take over the world with flowers and rainbows. It's, I just don't understand. If you had a secular, if you actually believed the secular ideology, we are just material instances of things moving around, and stimuli feels good. Why wouldn't you just do games like that? Why wouldn't you just play power games endlessly until your very last breath? Seems pretty reasonable to me if you had those base assumptions there. And I understand there's the 1% of deontologists and like honest people and everything, but it seems pretty obvious what the majority of the secular elites and such and their supporters actually think.
So just to comment on the point about Luther reducing marriage from a sacrament to a civil contract, leading to the basis of same-sex marriage. I definitely think when you take something like marriage and put it in the hands of civil leaders, it is going to degrade. But something else to keep in mind, even during the time of Catholic Europe, we were having people who cohabitated. So not only would they be married, but they would cohabitate with somebody else on top of that, or they would just practice some form of cohabitation on its own without it being officially recognized by the church. And it was not just something done by just rich aristocrats, but also members of the church as well. I think it was Cardinal Wolsey who served under King Henry VIII back when he was in communion with Rome. He had a mistress and they had children, and that was just expected. The only bishop who wasn't cohabitating was John Fisher. So even when it was in the hands of the church, there was some toleration of cohabitation, natural marriages along these lines that were not something which the church endorsed or supported, but which were tolerated. So you do see toleration of immoral marriages that do go on, and that's just continuing on right now. But I will agree that it definitely doesn't help when you take it completely away from the church, because you no longer give people a socially recognized goal or a proper understanding of marriage. Now it's just left into the hands of personal choice and opinion.
Freedom sucks.
Unfortunately, we don't have our token Protestant Auron MacIntyre to push back on any insults to Protestantism. But yeah, we got another super chat, Son of Tiamat, for $5. Be sure to tune into iHypocrites tonight. You can't stop progress. Okay, I said tonight at the wrong part. To see the wonders of liberal secularism. I'm familiar with the YouTuber. I'm with the Twitter user iHypocrite. I don't I know he makes videos sometimes, but I don't think I've ever watched them. But I guess that's a ringing endorsement from me. But check out his video wherever it is. But yeah. Yes, I also we also don't have my other token Protestant, Lambuda. And radical liberation is actually correct about this. Marriage precedes the church. Sacramental marriage doesn't. But marriage is a natural phenomena that existed before Jesus raised it to a sacrament 2,000 years ago.
And on top of that, when it existed as a sacrament, it existed monogamously. When it was a natural state of affairs, it was not uncommon for people to engage in polygamy.
Yeah, there's some very awkward, frequent habits that people did in the past in terms of, kind of stuff. But
I don't know, where are we doing? I mean, what else do we have to talk about today?
Trinity Sunday?
What were you going to say, Computing the Soul?
I was just saying liberalism bad. That was just the...
Oh, yeah.
Freedom bad.
Content of what I was going to say.
Literacy bad.
Return to monkey.
University
Reading,
bad.
Reading
You see,
has been the bane of my existence.
I'm going to qualify this, right? Literacy is bad in English. Just speak Greek.
Wish I learned Latin. Just grew up learning Latin, reading Latin text.
Imagine that, right? You can understand St. Augustine in his native language, but you can't understand pop music. Incredible.
Yeah.
Dude, we can become like Orthodox Jews or something.
They speak Hebrew.
I know, but no, that's what I'm saying. It's like we're the same except with Latin. So it's like we're completely separated from our society.
Based in Shiva Pill.
So true. So I don't know. Is there anything from that video you were talking about before, John Fisher, that you still needed to say?
Actually, John Fisher, could you post the name of that debate? Because I wasn't sure how the Muslim's name was spelled. Like I'm
pretty sure it's called Pikachu.
Just like the Pokemon.
Yeah.
No, it's pronounced Hakikachu. So I don't know. It does sound eerily like Pikachu. That's how I remember it. But yeah, I'll get it to you.
I must admit, like a Japanese rat monster thing versus a secularist in the day.
Well, no, Hakikachu is the Muslim one.
Yeah, but you said Pikachu. Yeah.
All right, there's the link. It's in the private chat. If anyone wants to throw that in the comment section, feel free. I'll warn you guys, it's like a 4.5 hour debate, but it's really good. And yeah, apostate prophet gets killed. Well, not literally, but he gets metaphorically slaughtered.
He gets metaphorically
He gets metaphorically Old Testament style pig on an altar.
So, I mean, are we done? Do we have anything else to say? Where are we at?
By the way, Christianity is true. I'm going to just steal that from Cameron Bertuzzi. I don't care. It's nice.
Okay.
Submit and return.
Return to Rome.
Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, are we done? Do we have more to say? Where are we at?
I'm good.
Okay, I'll take that as a word done. I don't know. Does anyone have anything they need to shill?
I'm John Fisher 2.0. Go to Original One Productions and subscribe. There will be a video on the Trinity coming up in 2.5 hours.
I got something. What? Sorry, you go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna make something cool. Probably on Tuesday. I have no idea what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be cool. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to myself, I'll try and get a video out this week. I haven't had a video in a while. So sorry about that. I'll try and make sure I get a video out this week. But 21st, what are you going to say?
Yeah. Look, I get it on the distant right. You know, like the left wing is like daddy issues, and the distant right is like mommy issues. But your mom told you. Your mom, if you remember correctly, listener, your mom told you to do something. And if it wasn't your actual mom, it was, the Mother of God, Mary. She told you at Fatima to pray the rosary every day. So get to it.
Yes.
Happy Trinity Sunday. Happy special summer
Also,
of a variety.
Don't feel you have to stop at once. Also, meditate on the scriptures. Do Lectio Divina. It's based.
To answer for this person, distributism is basically just Maoism plus the rosary. But yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us. It's been Settlers Lament. Goodbye.